Welcome, chosen ones. They imagined softness without awareness, kindness without boundaries. But what unsettled them was the realization that true purity doesn't mean blindness. A heart that loves deeply doesn't ignore truth. It recognizes it instantly. What they couldn't understand is how someone could carry compassion and clarity at the same time, offering grace without surrendering strength. Because an earth angel isn't fragile, they're discerning, grounded, and fully aware of what stands in front of them. And that kind of presence doesn't just comfort, it exposes. But here's what shifts everything. The moment that same soul stops dimming their power, the entire dynamic changes. Because what people mistake for softness is actually restraint. And when restraint is lifted, it reveals something unshakable. There's a different kind of intensity in someone who chooses peace, but is fully capable of precision. Someone who understands people deeply enough to see through every hidden motive. That's what unsettles them. Not noise, not aggression, but clarity wrapped in calm. Because when a person can read the room without speaking and still choose their response with intention, it dismantles every illusion control was built on. So when that presence finally stops filtering what it sees and allows truth to stand fully exposed, the impact is undeniable. It's not loud, it's not chaotic, it's precise. And that's what reaches people on a deeper level. Because there's something deeply unsettling about someone who can remain composed in the middle of disorder and still choose exactly when to step away, untouched. Those who misread that calm as something they can test eventually realize it wasn't passivity, it was control. And when that control shifts from observing to acting, the outcome is rarely what they expected. Number one, the power of a pure heart's boundaries. What most people fail to realize is that real kindness is selective, not limitless. A genuinely pure heart doesn't say yes to everything. It knows exactly when to say no. There's a quiet strength in someone who can care deeply and still refuse access when respect is absent. That's where the misunderstanding happens. They expect openness without limits, giving without protection, but what they encounter instead is discernment. And once that line is drawn, it doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity, and that's far harder to break. When you carry that kind of presence, your compassion isn't an invitation for misuse, it's a standard. It flows freely, but only where it's honored. What people often overlook is that the same heart that offers warmth also enforces distance without hesitation. There's an inner line that doesn't need to be announced because it's felt the moment it's approached. They notice the generosity, the patience, the openness, but they underestimate the quiet authority behind it. And when that boundary is activated, it's not reactive or emotional. It's immediate, unwavering, and final. When someone crosses that unseen line, the shift is immediate. And that's what catches them off guard. They expected tolerance, maybe even silence, but instead, they're met with a calm that doesn't bend. There's no argument, no chaos, just a clear withdrawal of access that speaks louder than words. What they thought was flexibility turns out to be structure, and what they assumed was weakness reveals itself as discipline. In that moment, they understand something they didn't before. Your kindness was never something to exploit. It was something they were trusted not to violate. That's where the discomfort really settles in for them, because they're used to resistance looking loud, emotional, or reactive. Instead, they're met with something steady, almost silent, yet completely immovable. There's no outburst to argue with, no drama to deflect, just a presence that has already decided where the line stands. And that kind of control unsettles people who rely on chaos to maintain influence. Because when someone can enforce limits without anger, without explanation, and without wavering, it removes every angle they thought they could use. What's left is a quiet certainty that doesn't need to prove itself, and that's what they don't know how to face. They reached for the comfort you offered, expecting it to always be available, but what they encountered instead was a standard they couldn't bypass. The same presence that felt inviting now stands firm, grounded in values that don't shift for convenience. That's what confuses them. They wanted warmth without accountability, connection without respect. But real kindness doesn't separate care from clarity. It knows exactly when to open the door and when to close it without a second thought. And once that boundary is recognized, it becomes clear that your softness was never unconditional access. It was a privilege shaped by principle. They once moved as if there were no consequences, as if your patience meant permission. But now they're confronted with something solid, something they can't negotiate or charm their way through. It isn't hostility. It isn't revenge. It's a boundary shaped by self-worth and protected by awareness. And that's what unsettles them most. Because what stands in front of them isn't just distance. It's a reflection of everything they overlooked, everything they assumed they could bypass. And in that realization, they're forced to face a truth they didn't prepare for. Access was never guaranteed. It was earned, and it can be permanently withdrawn. Number 2, a mind that sees through illusions. There's a quiet precision in the way you observe, a kind of awareness that doesn't just listen to words. It reads intent, patterns, and inconsistencies beneath them. What others miss, you register instantly, not because you're searching for flaws, but because your clarity doesn't allow deception to settle. People often underestimate this, thinking charm or strategy will go unnoticed until they realize they've been understood far more deeply than they expected. And that's where the shift happens. Because once someone is truly seen beyond their surface, every illusion they relied on begins to lose its power. They may arrive polished, saying all the right things, carrying a presence designed to persuade. But what they don't realize is that you are not responding to performance, you're reading beneath it. There's a quiet awareness that picks up on what isn't being said, the pauses, the shifts, the inconsistencies that reveal more than any words could. And while they believe they're in control of the impression they're creating, you've already understood the intention behind it. That's what unsettles them. Not rejection, but recognition. Because when someone is seen beyond their mask, without being exposed out loud, it leaves them standing in a space where pretense no longer works. They move the way they always have, confident in the patterns that have worked for them before, expecting to pass through unnoticed. But this time, something feels different, like the room itself has shifted. Without a word being said, they sense that nothing about them is going unseen. It's not confrontation, it's presence. A quiet awareness that makes every layer they rely on feel thin. And that's what unsettles them most. Because when someone no longer needs to call out the act for it to lose its power, the illusion collapses on its own, leaving them standing in a clarity they can't control or escape. That level of awareness shifts the entire dynamic without a single word being spoken. It creates a quiet pressure, a kind of stillness that makes pretense feel unstable. They can sense they're being understood beyond what they're showing, and that alone disrupts their balance. It's not exposure in the traditional sense. It's something subtler, more precise. Because when someone doesn't need to question you, challenge you, or even react to you, it removes the performance entirely. And in that silence, they're left facing a version of themselves they can't redirect or disguise. You'll notice the shift before they say a word. The tone tightens, the energy turns guarded, and reactions start coming from a place they didn't intend to reveal. It's not because you challenged them, but because your awareness disrupted their sense of control. What they once navigated with ease now feels uncertain, like every move is being weighed without explanation. And that's the quiet reversal they didn't expect. Without asserting dominance or creating conflict, you've changed the balance simply by seeing clearly. And in that space, control doesn't belong to the one who speaks the most. It belongs to the one who understands the most. What they fail to grasp is that your perception isn't driven by ego or the need to expose. It's simply your natural state of awareness. You're not searching for flaws or trying to dismantle anyone. You just recognize what's real without distortion. And that's what unsettles them. Because when truth is seen without effort, it quietly dissolves everything built on pretense. There's no attack, no accusation, just a clarity that leaves no room for illusion to stand. And for someone who depends on appearances to maintain control, that kind of silent recognition feels more threatening than any confrontation ever could. Number 3, a soul that commands respect without demanding it. There's a quiet authority in the way you carry yourself, a kind of presence that doesn't ask to be acknowledged yet, is felt the moment you enter a space. It's not built on volume or validation, but on alignment, on knowing who you are without needing to prove it. People sense it even if they can't explain it. And that's what makes it powerful. Because when someone stands fully in themselves without seeking approval, respect becomes a response, not a request. It's the kind of presence that doesn't need introduction because it's felt before it's explained. There's no reaching, no proving, no subtle attempts to win favor. And that alone shifts the atmosphere. People who are used to controlling attention or drawing validation find themselves unsettled by someone who isn't playing that game at all. Your stillness carries more weight than noise ever could. And that quiet certainty makes others pause, observe, and recalibrate without even realizing it. They may act indifferent, dismissive even, but your presence lingers long after the moment passes. There's something about someone who isn't trying to be seen that makes them impossible to ignore. You don't chase recognition. You don't adjust yourself to fit expectations. And that quiet certainty leaves an impression they can't quite shake. Because when someone carries their worth without announcing it, it challenges everything built on external validation. And even if they don't admit it, a part of them keeps circling back, trying to understand a confidence that doesn't depend on being acknowledged. It isn't pride or superiority, it's clarity. A grounded awareness of who you are that doesn't fluctuate based on how others respond to you. And that's what creates the disconnect for those who rely on approval as currency. They're used to influence being earned through attention and validation being traded for acceptance. But when they encounter someone who isn't participating in that exchange, it disrupts their entire framework because you're not rejecting connection. You're simply not negotiating your worth to receive it. But when they encounter someone who stands complete within themselves, the dynamic shifts in a way they didn't anticipate. There's no pull for approval, no subtle effort to impress or persuade, just a steady focus on direction, values, and inner alignment. That independence feels unfamiliar to those who expect interaction to revolve around validation. Because when you're rooted in your own path, you're not moved by opinion or swayed by attention. And that's what unsettles them. You're not distant, you're just not dependent. And that changes everything. They struggle to find leverage when there's nothing missing to exploit. There's no insecurity to hook into, no need for approval to manipulate, no gap to fill with influence. And what confuses them even more is your lack of urgency. You're not trying to outshine, outperform, or convince anyone of your worth. You simply exist in alignment, grounded and steady. That quiet completeness removes every usual point of control, leaving them facing something they can't sway, redirect, or define. Within that calm certainty is a presence that shifts the entire perspective. They begin to understand that you're not operating inside their expectations. You're grounded in your own reality. There's no need to seek permission, no urge to be acknowledged, because your position is already established from within. And that realization carries weight. It shows that respect isn't something you pursue or negotiate. It's something that naturally forms around those who stand fully in themselves. And for those who rely on control or validation, that kind of self-contained power is something they can feel, but never quite grasp. Number 4, the unyielding resolve of a guardian. There's a point where observation turns into action. And when that line is crossed, your presence shifts into something unmistakably firm. It's not driven by anger, but by principle. A deep alignment with what is right that doesn't bend under pressure. What people once saw as quiet now reveals itself as deliberate strength. the kind that steps forward without hesitation when something needs to be protected. And that's where the true force lies, not in constant resistance, but in knowing exactly when to stand and refusing to move once you do. This is the moment everything becomes unmistakably clear. A line is drawn and it holds. There's no hesitation, no internal debate, no room for negotiation. What once felt flexible now stands firm, grounded in something deeper than opinion. And that's what disrupts people the most. They're accustomed to shifting perspectives, to finding angles, to influencing outcomes. But here, there's nothing to move. Because when someone is anchored in principle rather than convenience, persuasion loses its power, and compromise is no longer an option. But when your values are rooted that deeply, they don't shift based on pressure or persuasion. There's a clarity that moves you to act without hesitation, a certainty that doesn't wait for approval or consensus. When something crosses the line, you don't ignore it, and you don't dilute your response to make others comfortable. You address it with precision, with purpose, and with full presence. Because for you, standing for what's right isn't situational. It's a constant. And once you step into that position, there's no halfway, no retreat, and no confusion about where you stand. That level of steadiness is what surprises them most. They were expecting hesitation, maybe even compromise, but instead, they're met with something solid, something that doesn't shift under pressure. It's not loud or aggressive, yet it carries a weight that's impossible to ignore. Because when someone moves from a place of conviction rather than emotion, their presence becomes unshakable. And in that moment, what once looked like softness reveals itself as strength, calm, controlled, and completely unbreakable. They don't need to raise their voice or create a scene. The shift in their presence says everything. It carries a quiet intensity, a signal that something has been recognized and won't be ignored. There's no performance, no attempt to intimidate, yet it feels definitive. Because when someone stands aligned with truth, their energy alone sets a boundary others can sense. And that's when it becomes clear. This isn't a kindness that can be negotiated or swayed. It's a loyalty to what's right that remains steady, regardless of the pressure around it. It disrupts everything they thought they understood about strength. They're used to power being loud, forceful, or reactive. But this is different. This is stillness that doesn't break, a certainty that doesn't need to prove itself. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because when someone is anchored in conviction, pressure doesn't move them, it reveals them. No noise, no resistance, just a presence that remains steady no matter what surrounds it. And in that steadiness, it becomes undeniable. This isn't just kindness. It's strength refined, controlled, and impossible to shake.